Leroy. He loved working on the farm with his dad. I knew Leroy from grade 5. We moved to Chatfield High School when I was in 5th grade. And I knew Leroy from grade 5 on through grade 12, or most of grade 12, I should say. All he wanted to do really was work on his dad's farm. He struggled. He struggled immensely in his studies. He didn't get math very well. He couldn't read very well. Just school was tough for him. He did not excel at all. And then later in high school, a conversation occurred between Leroy's parents and one of the teachers. And the teacher said, you know, if you failed as much as your son has, you wouldn't be able to get out of bed in the morning. I mean, how does someone keep doing this? You know, maybe what he just needs to do is just work on his farm with his dad. You know, maybe he just needs to work on the farm with you. And maybe this just isn't for him. And so Leroy left school and just worked for his dad. He didn't have to. He wanted to. He loved it. He had the choice to do that. He had the choice to choose whether to work on the farm with his dad or do whatever he wanted to do. And that's the beauty of our culture, you know. We can choose to become what we want, who we want to be. We can dabble in different careers and different jobs just to see what it's like. You know, in Jesus' time, you followed your father or your mother in their careers. It was just what you did. It was expected of you. Jesus is kind of the exception because you remember at birth that the angel showed up to Mary and Mary said, this is going to be a blessed child. You know, something's in store for him that's a little bit different than the other kids. So keep an eye on him. And so Jesus did not become a carpenter. He left the trade as he was 30 years old or so and went on and he did a different ministry in his life. He had the choice. Leroy had the choice, as most of us do. I was on the candidacy committee for the synod a while back, and we were the group of people that when people said, I want to become a pastor, I want to become a deacon, you went to the candidacy committee of the synod, and we interviewed you several different times throughout and felt whether you had a true call or not, and asked you lots of questions and see if you're really fit for that or if it's just something you wanted to do. But it's a two-pronged process. You need the Spirit from yourself and also the Spirit from the community before you become ordained and become a deacon or a parish pastor. Well, there was a student from an African country, and his father was a pastor, and I don't think that he wanted to be a pastor. He went through the process because to save face in the culture. You did what your father told you to do. So what he did is a passive-aggressive technique was to get caught drunk driving and do some other things that were kind of questionable behaviors. Not really extreme, but just questionable. And the committee said, you know what? I don't think you're really cut out to do this. We don't see that your heart is in this, and some of your behaviors wouldn't really be, conducive to the line of work that you want to pursue. What he really wanted to do was study law. And after the small committee came back and they said, this is what we decided to do, I said, was he relieved? What? Was the kid relieved? Yeah, why? I said, well, I imagine he still saved face with his father. It wasn't his decision to leave. It was someone else who told him that he couldn't leave. It was that strong. And so we celebrate in our culture that we can choose, what we want to do. I can choose to cook out brats at a tailgate party if I want to, at a Packers game or Brewers game or whatever I want to do. I can wear clothes that are wool and polyester blends. I can do a lot of different things because I have the freedom to do that. But for some, it's not that easy to do. Not that easy to do. You notice in the reading, when Jesus took his disciples aside and they asked him again, how was his answer different than what he told the Pharisees? What did Moses say? Well, a man could dismiss his wife with a certificate of divorce. Okay. But then later on, his disciples come to him and say, tell us a little bit more about this. And he says, well, a husband can issue a divorce certificate to his wife, and a wife can issue a divorce certificate for her husband. What? Wait, what? A wife can do that too? Now, that's not really what we're about, because women aren't supposed to be able to do that. There are rules. And so in this simple couple of words that Jesus added, he kind of leveled the field a bit. Now, Jesus was a radical, but not extreme. He wasn't with weapons and trying to overthrow the government, but just taking the Jewish laws and tweaking them so that they fit for the people that he was ministering to. A wife can write a certificate of divorce for her husband? Well, yeah. And the same token, if she does, she faces the same consequences that the husband does too. She gets charged with adultery if she marries someone else. So in essence, she gets the same equality in that, but she also gets the same equality in the consequences. Oh, well, that's different. How does that work? And then later on, Jesus brings the children and embraces them and says, unless you've got a faith of a child, you're lost. And people are scratching their heads saying, but these are kids. Who cares? Well, parents did care about their children, but the children had no rights at all. They were below women in terms of, I don't know, you want to say possessions, but they didn't have much. And here Jesus is saying that the faith of this one here, this child that doesn't know a lot of things, right from wrong, and is still being trained, the one who just takes things on faith and trusts the parents to do the right thing for them, that trusts that the parents will simply just take care of them. This child who looks at other kids without any kind of sense of who they are or what class they come from or the color of their skin or whatever. They just want a companion to play with. Yeah, that's it. That's what we want to aim for. This simple trust in the Father, in God. Jesus didn't go to the chief priests and the Sadducees and those who were scholars. He didn't say, through one of these powerful people, that's who you follow in faith. No, they went just the opposite way. And so we look at this saying, what's going on here? In his other sections that Sharon read, Jesus is leveling the field and saying, God created a partner for Adam. And just a side note, too. You know what the Hebrew word for man is? Ish. My grandmother would say ish. Ish kabibble. Oh, okay. And women is ish, ish, isha. Something like that. I thought, ish. Hey, ish, ish, ish. But he wanted a partner. And he got a partner. And the two of them were able to live together and to take care of creation together. I find that this passage is talking about equality. It's talking about that all people in God's eyes are equal. Jesus, the woman at the well, she said, you haven't had 5 husbands. When the one you're living with now is not your husband. And she believed him. And she went back, told her friends. Now, this wasn't in Jewish territory. This was Syrophoenicia. And she told her friends, and they believed her. And some went back to find Jesus, and they believed her. They took her seriously. Jesus took the children seriously. He took the needs of those outsiders seriously. And how we've come a long way since then. In some ways, yes, in many ways, no. I don't know if I told this story when I was an intern in Allentown, Pennsylvania, and there was a big Lutheran church on Main Street, and it was pretty powerful at the time. A lot of millionaires were members. During the Depression, they were building. They had no money problems at all. And they had a huge, what do you want to call it? Place where the pastor lived. What do you call that? Parsonage attached to the building. 3 levels, huge. Brick and stone. Built in 1904. And I remember one day, one of the street guys who I served with, developed a relationship on a Sunday morning at a nearby church, he said, I come by your church. When I see things happening in the alleyways, the kids, they don't have any direction, they have no place to go. So I invited him to come over, and Sam and I, my supervising pastor, went in the alleyway with him, and he looked at the building and said, you know what, is this being used for anything? We said, no, it needs repair. We're not using it for anything right now. He said, you could use this as a youth place to have kids do things, whatever it is, but just something for the kids to have on a weekday or a weekend or something. Have a sanctuary for the kids. And I thought, you know what? And I had this feeling like Jesus was standing right there next to me, dressed as a homeless guy, telling me the possibilities for ministry that Trinity, Christ could do, Christ Church could do. We brought it to council, and let me say this, there were 25 people on council. Do you think we got much done? Well, sometimes it went long, but they voted it down. They said, no, it's going to cost at least $350,000 to make this so it's livable. And in my mind, said, you just paid $2.5 million from endowment to redo the sanctuary for your 12th night performances, and you still have $2.5 million more in endowment. What are you going to do? What are the possibilities? Who's knocking? What do you think if a businessman dressed in a suit came and offered the same thing? You think they would listen? I just wonder if there's the same kind of respect given, or we listen to those of importance, but others we don't really have time for. It's just that something that Jesus kept needling us to do, to be, to accept, to take people seriously, and not take people for granted based on their gender or their race or their age or their sex or whatever. He just said people are people. In these verses, I've kind of subtly laid out the playing field that we're all children of God. I mean, do we still embrace the norms of the culture back then? In some ways, we feel we need to. In other ways, it just doesn't work for us. I don't want to have an arranged marriage. I want to know who I'm marrying, and I want to pick who I get to marry. I want to eat shellfish. I don't want my lobster roll and those other things. There are just certain things in the culture that I just would not be able to accept from that. But as Christians, we pick and choose. Feel, we're faithful people. We have to really look at the Scripture with discerning eyes and say, is that cultural? Is that something that Jesus was saying to be part of? Was Jesus saying, look at the broader picture. Cultures change, especially ones that are 2,000 years in Middle Eastern cultures than ours today. We have a lot more freedoms in our culture than they did then. We can complain to the government if it's wrong, if we peacefully do it, without the fear of getting thrown in jail or hung on a cross. It wasn't until they told the Pilate that Jesus was an insurrectionist to the Roman government that he took action. We can't have that. Hang him on the cross. Get rid of this insurrectionist. It's not good for our government. Well, we wouldn't necessarily do that in our government, would we? So, back to Scripture again. Jesus breaks his norms, some of his norms that just didn't fit, that excluded people. Ministry was important, theology followed. Or to read theology correctly, as he was trying to do with the people of his time, direct them back to God's ever-encompassing love that looked at individual people and cared for the needs of those who were powerless or voiceless or what have you. He broke the norms so they could fulfill their calling. He breaks the norms so we can fulfill our callings in whatever we choose to do. He continued to care for the sick and the needy and the outcast. He showed them extreme love in the midst of an oppressive government, the Roman Empire. We know the disciples had to hide out in houses and show the sign of a fish. If you knew we were Christians, it was like gang symbols, right? But it wasn't like that. It was You knew you were Christians if you had a fish somewhere on you. That was the secret code. And you met in houses in secret because you were afraid. Not so much now. We have freedoms, lots of freedoms. And a lot of people have paid the price for that. Ultimately, Jesus paid the price for that. He showed us the wisdom of the child, the openness, the willingness to accept Jesus, to accept relationship with someone who cares for them deeply, and in return cares for others deeply as well. We have this kind of a God. He cares for all of us, despite who we are, what we do, what we own. This is the God of the Old Testament. This is the God of the New Testament, personified through Jesus Christ, who came to save us and free us. Amen.